During the Cold War, one of the things Soviet designers always had some trouble with was delivering ground attack strike jets that had balanced performance. Some of their jets were really fast but had no range, some had great payload but were slow, some had really accurate targeting systems but a tiny payload, so on and so on. Well, with the development of the Su-27 fighter in the late 1970s, the Sukhoi Bureau realized that they had a great airframe on their hands that might be suited for conversion into a pretty well-rounded strike jet. In the early 1980s, a prototype for a naval flanker was used as the basis for developing the new strike fighter, and work started in earnest on what eventually became the Su-34. Development of the airframe proceeded much faster than the weapons system, with the first prototype finally flying in early 1990. The plane immediately showed potential, but it was also obvious that a lot more work was going to be needed to refine it into an operational aircraft. When the Soviet Union collapsed, work on the project slowed to a snail's pace, and it wasn't until December of 1993 that the refined and fully updated jet finally had its first flight. It was another year before the first fully combat-capable example was produced, but by this point, the development funds had almost completely run out, and while the Su-34 was generally considered ready for production, it took another 10 years to get a small pre-production batch finished and into advanced testing. It wasn't until 2011 that the plane was finally cleared for regular service, and 2014 when the first squadron finally became fully operational, making this one of the most modern aircraft we have in War Thunder as of making this video. The Su-34 itself has obvious lineage back to the Su-27, but includes a modified tail, a new nose, canards, and a completely different combat system. One point of interesting trivia about the jet that's kinda hotly contested is that it was originally designed to house a small rearward-facing radar set in the tail boom. Now, different sources give wildly conflicting information about this, but my personal take, based on what I could find, is that the rearward radar was probably only fitted to some of the pre-production jets, and most likely is not part of the standard kit for regular production examples. What we get in War Thunder is the Su-34, a strike aircraft in rank 8 of the Soviet tech tree at battle rating 13.3 for air and 12.7 for ground. Unsurprisingly, the jet has a fully featured ballistics computer with all of the usual top-tier features, including an integrated targeting system, except it doesn't get a thermal imager. It has a modern radar warning receiver unit with C through L band detection, and a pretty strong optical zoom for the integrated targeting system. The radar set is the V004, which, as of making this video, is one of the most advanced radar sets in the game. It has good range with strong target detection and tracking, along with all of the usual top-tier air-to-air modes, plus ground MTI and ground track while scan modes. However, no helmet-mounted targeting and no IRST. For loadouts, this jet gets an enormous selection of air-to-air missiles, air-to-ground munitions, and some drop tanks. It's got access to basically every top-tier weapon in the Soviet tech tree. For air-to-air missiles, your dogfighting weapon is the R-73. This is the same all-aspect, high off-bore sight weapon you've probably seen by now, and it's still very effective on the Su-34. You also get all 4 versions of the R-27, with the ER being a really strong option, especially while grinding upgrades on the jet. The Su-34 can also take up to 8 R-77 active radar homing missiles. The radar set on this plane makes data link shots a bit more reliable than with the Su-27 or MiG-29, but just remember that the radar set only has 4 channels, so don't go spamming them all off at the same time. For air-to-ground weapons, the jet again gets basically every guided weapon in the Soviet tech tree, and it would take an hour to go over all of them individually. Some standout options on the jet include the KH-29TD, which is a TV-guided anti-tank missile with an enormous warhead, the new Grom-2 satellite-guided glide bombs, which have really good range but can only attack fixed points on the ground and take forever to reach the targets, and the CAB 1500 LG, which is a laser-guided bomb with good tracking and a huge warhead. The real champion, though, is the KH-38M. You get a TV-guided version and a laser-guided version. These missiles have incredibly good range, high speed, and accurate tracking. As of making this review, these are arguably the best missiles in the game for doing close air support, and certainly the best in the Soviet tech tree. For flight performance, the Su-34 has some serious trade-offs. The first thing to know is that yes, this thing is based on the Su-27, but it's a lot heavier with almost the same engines. Its acceleration and climb rate are fine for a bomber, and remember, this is a bomber, but they're a bit lower than most air superiority fighters up at the top tier. Now, the real claim to fame for this jet is going to be its agility with those canards, but that too is a big trade-off, as the Su-34 has really bad energy retention in anything harder than a pretty mild turn. This is due to the increased weight, and also aerodynamic forces where the bottom of the aircraft can actually act as an air brake if you swing too far into a high AOA turn. You absolutely can pull those crazy airshow stunts, especially if you're using full realistic controls, but just remember that it's going to leave you in a very low energy state, and the actual utility of that stuff in combat is marginal at best. Taking the Su-34 out in air battles is kind of a tale of two planes. You can credibly use this jet for air combat and ground attack, and it does fairly well in either role. If you're going for ground attack, you can use its long-range weapons to perform standoff attacks without getting too close to enemy fighters, and using the Grom-2 glide bombs to hit a base from long range, like halfway across the map even, and then going in for air combat after you drop them, is a viable tactic. But there's one problem. On the regular-sized maps, you're going to be getting pushed by spam ram throwers pretty hard while you're trying to climb out into position for the Grom drop. Plus, the Groms are very slow and can sometimes take 3 to 5 minutes to actually hit the target base, so just remember that the destruction and the points may be kind of delayed, and there's going to be a lot of time for somebody else to swoop in and blow up your target before your bombs get there. Now, if you want to focus on air combat, you want to remember the two big caveats: the lack of helmet-mounted targeting and the crap energy retention in high AOA maneuvers. The strong radar set can let you get some pretty solid shots from longer ranges with the R-77s or even the R-27ERs, but just remember that the lack of helmet targeting can be a pretty big disadvantage in a close-up fight in the current meta. I included some footage in this review that wasn't really my best performance with this jet, but it did a good job at illustrating a few situations where helmet targeting would have made a huge difference. The crazy airshow stunts might save you on occasion and be fun to show off, but it's going to be the exception rather than the rule, and most of the time that stuff isn't going to do anything for you. Flying the Su-34 as close air support brings some similar considerations into play, but you can be a bit more flexible with your loadouts if you want to do air combat and ground attack at the same time. The radar set has really good low-altitude performance, and I actually found the Su-34 to be better than I expected at combat air patrols going out over a ground battle, especially on some of the maps with more rugged terrain. Another consideration is that the field of view of the built-in laser targeting system kinda sucks, and if you're using laser-guided weapons, you can't turn off as quickly as you can with some other jets. Otherwise, the usual top-tier close air support meta still applies. You're at the mercy of the clouds, top-tier SPAA is no joke, and it can take over 900 spawn points to get into this thing, depending on the weapon load you want to use. Visually, some folks are going to think the nose is pretty stupid looking, but I really don't mind it. The 3D model is very well done, and as a special note, the gray camo pattern you can get has no rondelles or insignia on it at all. So if you're the type of player who likes to decorate your plane with decals and stuff, make sure to unlock that. Landing is mostly simple as long as you keep in mind that the jet doesn't have an air brake and is a bit heavier than a regular flanker. The gear can go down at about 500 kilometers an hour, and it's pretty tough, so damaged landings won't usually be too difficult to survive. The cockpit on this jet is another side-by-side bomber cockpit. Lots of MFDs all over the place, a fully modern heads-up display, and the interior is well detailed, but the visibility is awful. I didn't have a good time in air combat in VR, but flying it generally was still fine. To close out on the Su-34. This jet has access to basically every top-tier weapon in the Soviet tech tree. It can pull some insane high AOA flight maneuvers, and it's got a really good radar set. However, it's a little heavy, and the energy retention isn't very good. The targeting system has a limited forward angle field of view, and it doesn't get a helmet-mounted targeting system. The final verdict on the Su-34 is that this jet has the potential to be an incredibly capable multi-role fighter, and it can credibly perform just about any type of mission. This thing is absolutely worth the grind. As always, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, check out this other one.